He overheard my mom telling me, "When are you going to tell him that the kids aren't his?" Hey Reddit, I have been reading a lot of posts here and giving advice to people I could relate with, but not in a million years, even if I had to be reborn again. If only that existed. Did I imagine I would also be one of them? I'd have laughed my butt off too if someone had told me I will write about myself too. This is actually one of the most painful phases in my life. I never imagined that I was going to lose one of the most beautiful gifts in my life because of love, at least I believed it was. But I was wrong, and it's actually too late. I'm on the verge of losing everything. My marriage, my family, and even my mental health is at stake. I'm about to lose myself, and I'm so frustrated that I decided to pour it out here the way I saw people do it, at least if it's going to help me feel any better. My name is Angelica, and I'm 27 years old. I married my husband Andrew 6 years ago, shortly after my breakup with my ex-boyfriend, hiding the fact that I was pregnant with my ex's child. My husband and I were best friends during our university days, and I knew he saw me as more than just friends, but I had intentionally played dumb and ignored his feelings to me using friendship as a shield. Then I didn't feel the same way towards him, and unlike Felix, he was the nerdy type and a bookworm at that, and to make matters worse, he was more of an introvert, certainly not my type of guy. I was attracted to smart, handsome guys who clearly had a bad guy vibe, and my husband Andrew was a complete opposite. Though he was smart and handsome, his cool and introverted personality just didn't click with me, and I had intentionally turned a blind eye to his sincere love towards me, but that didn't stop him. He stayed by my side even though he had to bear the title of a friend. I can't believe I hurt such a person. He was clearly the most beautiful gift I had ever received in my life, but I messed up. I had succeeded in marrying Andrew because he was the stable one, despite the fact that another man's baby was already in my womb, and he had been nothing but a faithful and loving husband, as well as the best father to our twins. He loved me so much that he wouldn't let me work, so I was a full-time housewife while he did all the hustling. He would sometimes come home late and exhausted, but that would never stop him from staying up to talk to me and play with our kids for hours, despite the fact that he would have to leave the next morning to work early. He did his best to make sure I don't miss his presence and our kids, and I were always happy. It wasn't hard for me to move on from Felix and slowly open my heart to my husband. After all, we were married, and even though he had no clue he wasn't the father of our kids, his love was still the same from day one. He was the best man in my life, but I realized it too late. I can't believe I tore down such a rare happiness because of something I once considered was love, which is so stupid of me. I know most of you are going to swear at me and call me a selfish person, but no one in the world is perfect, and I'd like you all to think from my own point of view. I must admit, I deeply regret the decision I made and the actions I had carried out, but there's nothing I can do to right my wrongs. I've tried, but I don't know what to do anymore. It all started a few days before our 6th marriage anniversary. My longtime friend Rita had just visited. It had been almost 7 years since she left the country, and she had just returned. She came over to bond with me just like old times, and it felt so good to do something completely different from my daily routine that I had been pulling for 6 years now. We had a lot of fun, and she talked about how shocked she was when she heard about my breakup with Felix, and as if the shock wasn't enough, I immediately got married to Andrew, who was one of the few people I wouldn't have considered getting married to. I proudly boasted to her about the fact that Andrew was my everything now and how much I loved him. I even went on assuring her that love needs time to grow, and with the 6 years I have been together with Andrew, I had never for once regretted my decision. She had laughed at my words before finally telling me about the fact that Felix was back in the country and they had coincidentally met. She told me that he had just divorced his wife, and when she and Felix were both together, he talked so much about me, and he clearly still had feelings for me. Hearing that, something buried deep down inside me tingled, and I don't know if I was happy about the news, but I was certainly not displeased hearing about him. I had managed to shove the topic away, assuring Rita that I had moved on and was now happy with my marriage. My husband came home that night, and I had tried to make moves on him, but he declined, stating he was tired and he wasn't in the mood. Though Andrew was sweet and caring, we rarely made out. We would only sleep together during weekends and only when he wasn't too exhausted to have an intimate moment with me. If I am in the mood and try to make advances, he would decline, stating his same old reasons. But I never took offense to that and tried to be very understanding. He was clearly doing a lot for the family, but that night I felt so upset about it. I don't know what came over me. Hearing the fact that my ex was back, and he still felt a thing for me, must have messed with me. After Andrew rejected me, unlike other days that I would just be understanding, this time it was different. I got furious and I lashed out at him bitterly, telling him how lonely I felt, and it had been months since we made love, but he only tried to calm me down and he didn't give me the words I wanted to hear, so I stormed out of the bedroom and slept in our children's bedroom that night. When I got up in the morning, he had made me breakfast and left a bouquet of flowers with a note saying he was sorry. My husband was still as sweet as always, but that didn't lighten my mood unlike before. Rita came around that day and she noticed my mood, and that made her ask me what the problem was. I was reluctant to tell her at first, but then I ended up spilling everything. First, I just told her that I was tired of sitting at home all day babysitting and doing house chores and cooking, that I wanted to do something different, something fun, and my biggest mistake was bringing up my sex life. I had told her that my husband rejected me the previous night and that I made advances, but he was too tired to engage, and that this was not the first time it was happening. The days we slept together were not as much as I wanted, and this time it had been months since we were last intimate with each other. Rita told me not to worry and advised me to do things to spice up my marriage a bit, and she went on saying that getting married to Andrew is like locking myself in just to please him. I rarely partied, unlike before. Even the way I dressed had changed, and I was like a completely different person. She then offered to take me out for shopping so that I could blow off the steam and do things to help me feel better. Immediately, she said that I called my twins nanny while I left shopping with Rita. I tried out different outfits, both the modest and the bizarre ones. I felt so good. I had never felt so free in a long time. She had offered to take me clubbing, and me knowing fully well my husband would be home late, I quickly jumped at the opportunity, and in a few hours I found myself in a club dancing and drinking like my life depended on it. I still loathe that day so much because that day marked the day my life began to go down the drain. If only I had not gone to the club that night, would things have been different? Would I have been able to avert the deep darkness that had overshadowed my whole being? I have a lot of questions and regrets, but I have no one to turn to, nor have I seen any means of escape. Most times I wake up to my life now and wish it was all a dream, and by the time I wake up, Andrew will be smiling beside me again just like he always does. But those are all false hopes, and a painful reality that breaks my heart and brings floods of tears each time I come to terms with myself that it really happened. I met Felix at the bar that night. At first I was shocked and upset to see him, but then when he slowly approached me and greeted me, I still don't know what came over me. Rita immediately left us both together, claiming she had something important to tend to, and she felt we both had a lot to talk about. When we were both alone, Felix came to me and offered me a dance with him. I won't lie, at that time I had completely forgotten I was married. I don't know how it happened, but we found ourselves on the dance floor dancing so intimately, and he kept playing his hands around my body. I had this feeling I had never felt in almost 3 years. It was as if something I had lost suddenly resurfaced, and all the hatred I had bottled up for him vanished, and before I knew what was happening, I found myself in bed with Felix that night. I had woken up to the call from the babysitter who kept calling as it was time for her to leave. I swiftly pulled my clothes on and rushed out of the room, feeling embarrassed and guilty about what had just happened. When I got home that night, I immediately showered and waited for my husband to come home, only to receive a text from him that he would be pulling an all-nighter due to the recent project he was in charge of. I immediately agreed, as I was still trembling from what I had done and wasn't sure I had the courage to face him after what I did. It was bad enough that I had kept him in the dark about the real father of our children, and now I made it worse by cheating on him with the same person. I had clearly betrayed my husband, but a part of me couldn't stop thinking about what happened that night. My husband came home the next day, and I had managed to pull myself together, convincing myself that it was just a mistake and everything would be okay. I had completely forgotten that day was our 6th anniversary. He had bought me my favorite cake along with a new designer bag. I felt so bad I had completely forgotten about our anniversary, but he assured me he was okay and that being with me right now was more than enough of a gift for him. Those words shredded my heart. How could I betray someone that only ever sees the good side of me? I asked myself continuously as we had dinner together. I went in to take a shower and my husband sweetly joined me and we made out for the first time in months. But strangely, my mind wasn't there. I had been bothering him about it, but now we were making love. My body was there, but my mind was somewhere else. It was back in the night at the club, and the night I spent with Felix, which is clearly wrong, but I couldn't control my feelings, and my husband's touch and kisses kept reminding me of Felix. It was so wrong that I had cheated on him the night before our anniversary, and then, even when he was in front of me, I still kept thinking of another person. I still kept reminiscing on that shameful night. At some point, I kept seeing my husband's face as Felix, and that's when I knew it was clearly not normal anymore. Later that night, my husband told me he would be leaving for a business trip, which might last for about 6 months, and he wasn't so sure how things might play out. I told him I was going to be fine, and that his work was also important to him, and that I would be fine with our children. A few days passed, and my husband left the country. I had gone grocery shopping that day and ran into Felix again. He offered that we both sit out and talk about what happened between us that night, and I agreed. I needed to make it clear with him that I was married, and that night was clearly a mistake, so we should move on and forget about it just like we did in the past. But sitting in front of Felix turned me into a complete idiot, and I was so mesmerized by his handsome face and features that I actually forgot all I had to say. We stared at each other for a while before he finally spoke. He apologized for what he did in the past, saying he deeply regrets hurting me then, and he was hoping we could start over again. He said he won't apologize for the night at the club, because it was a night he could truly be himself after the years that had passed, and he doesn't regret it. Those words made me forget everything about my current life because deep down I felt the same way. To be honest with myself, I missed his touch so much, and that night brought back emotions and feelings I thought were dead. I was certain I was thinking silently about it, but it turned out I had said it to his face. I had no idea when I said it out, and it was nothing but the truth. Meeting Felix that night was like satisfying my fantasy. He was smart, handsome, and of course had the bad guy vibe I liked so much. A total opposite of Andrew, who was a nerdy man, a bookworm, and a workaholic. That's how I saw Andrew, though, at least in my eyes, but that doesn't mean I don't or didn't love my husband. He is such a great guy and every woman's kind of man, and I still detest myself so much for the decision I made that day. After I told Felix about how I truly felt, he had offered me a card with his number, but I declined, affirming that I love my husband and I don't want to hurt such a good person. I got up to leave, but he grabbed my hand, and my whole body was aroused the moment his hand held my arm, and I was so lost in his eyes that I barely heard the last words he said to me. He mentioned I should take my time to think about it, and my husband doesn't need to know about it, as it was only going to be between the both of us. He asked me to call him once I get to a decision. I got home that day, and shamelessly, my conversation with Felix was all I could think of. I regret it so much, but it's too late, and there's nothing I can do to undo what I did. After hitting on it for days, I decided to go ahead with it, especially since my husband wasn't home. I was sure it wouldn't be a problem. I only needed to be careful. That night, I left my kids with my mom and went to meet Felix. The moment I got into his room, I had already started striping my clothes off. I just couldn't wait anymore. Having him was all I could see and think of. I had clearly forgotten what was right and wrong. Even my wedding vow just wasn't enough to stop me. We made love numerous times that night, and I went home the next morning. Felix and I got so attached to each other we kept seeing each other. One time turned to twice, and then it continued. We kept sleeping with each other, and I had to hide it from Andrew because I did not want to lose my husband. I loved my husband too, but at the same time I also loved Felix. Is it possible to love two people? Because looking back now, I must admit I'm the biggest idiot in the world, and I hate myself so much for that. Just as fate would want to punish me, the worst happened. My pathetic fantasy and fun world came to an end when I found out I was pregnant. I was pregnant for the very same guy that abandoned me years ago with his children. I can't believe how much of an ingrate I am. I hurt the very man that saved my life from becoming worthless. It was bad enough that I couldn't even live in peace with the fact that the twins wasn't his, as I was always so scared my husband would find out. The kids he raised with so much love in his heart and happiness that glittered in his eyes were not actually his biological children, and now I'm about to bring him another fake child. I kept thinking about what my next step would be, and I decided to pin my husband as the father as usual. Later that day, I was at my mom's when he called me via video call, and I told him I was pregnant. I could see the joy on his face. He was so happy with the news that his happiness made me feel muddled inside me. I felt so terrible lying to him, and I felt so sorry that he was completely clueless about everything. He was so over the moon that he concluded the baby was going to be a boy and kept throwing different names at me, asking which one would be suitable for our baby that's on the way. Listening and watching him do that broke me down, and I couldn't help but cry. I kept crying and I just couldn't stop. My husband kept asking if I was so happy that I even had to cry, and I told him I missed him so much, and that's the reason for my tears. I told him maybe it was because I'm pregnant that I have been really emotional and so sensitive recently. He smiled and kept finding words to make me smile. My husband was certainly the best. Why couldn't I just see that? Why did things have to come to this? I tried to pull myself together. I needed to be stronger and more determined. I couldn't afford to mess up now. I was able to do it once, so I felt I could pull it off the second time again. Later that evening, shortly after dinner, my mom had just tucked the kids to bed as they were exhausted from playing all day with the neighbors' kids. I was seated in the living room, staring into space that I barely heard her walk in. She laggardly laid her hand on my shoulder and pulled me into a warm, comforting hug. She tried to comfort me and asked me if things were so hard on me. I couldn't help but burst into tears, and I kept sobbing in her arms. She told me she had heard my conversation with my husband and had been watching me for days now, and she could tell something was bothering me. I couldn't say anything, no matter how much I tried to. I couldn't bring myself to admit my dirty deeds in front of her. How in the world am I going to explain to my mom that I am pregnant with another man's child and the other two in the room are still not my husband's kids too? Before I could finish lamenting in my thoughts, the next words that came out of my mother's mouth silenced me. "When are you going to tell him the kids aren't his?" my mom asked me, and her eyes were tightly locked to mine. I had immediately stopped crying. Not like I stopped, but I was too shocked to cry. She told me she is my mother, and she knew me even more than I knew myself. She told me she has always known the kids weren't Andrew's, as there wasn't much of a resemblance between them. But Andrew's undying love for me had blinded him, that he clearly hadn't noticed or suspected I could do something like that to him. I finally opened up to my mom about everything that went on, and the fact that even the baby in my womb still belonged to the same guy, and all I had done in my husband's absence. The next thing that came between us was the sound of glass shattering. Our attention immediately diverted to where the sound came from, only for us to see my husband standing right by the door. Our family picture frame had fallen, causing the shattering noise, and the look on Andrew's face was a clear confirmation that he had heard everything. I could feel my heart sink into my stomach as it felt like my arteries had just been cut off. My mom and I both got to our feet as we stood unable to say a word. My husband just stood there looking dazed as he clenched his fists so tight that I thought he might bleed. I was trembling so much that I couldn't feel my legs anymore. I had no idea what to do next. I could feel his rage emitting from his body as his eyes were bloodshot. I felt so guilty that I couldn't even say his name. "Why?" I remembered how his voice thundered. He kept asking me why I did such a thing to him. All his life, ever since our paths crossed, he had done nothing but love me. He loved me so much that it was killing him right now to come in terms with everything he had just heard. I immediately dropped to my knees and started begging. I kept wailing and rolling on the floor. Finally, the grip on his fist loosened and he turned to leave the room. I immediately rushed and held his feet, begging him to forgive me, that I would die if he left me. I kept swearing never to cheat on him, and I was going to devote my remaining life to loving him and being a perfect wife. Andrew burst out laughing hysterically. He laughed so hard that I turned cold as I was scared of him. Is this really the man I married? I had never seen this side of him before. Andrew loved me so much that he had never been mad at me before. Even when I was the one at fault, he would always be the first to say sorry and make peace with me. I was sure I had him completely wrapped on my fingers, but his countenance that night proved me so wrong. He looked at me with so much disgust in his eyes. It was as if every bit of love he had for me vanished. How could his love for me just disappear? I wasn't going to give up, so I kept pleading. Andrew threw my hands away and his facial expression changed drastically. He looked like he was going to kill me if I laid a finger on him again. He told me that he came rushing to my mom's place since I was there just to see me and make me happy, but only to be welcomed in such a cruel way. He sternly told me that this should be the last time he'd set eyes on me again, and if I ever made the mistake to appear in front of him ever again, he wasn't sure what he might do to me. Hearing his words sent shivers down my spine. The man in front of me was clearly not my husband. He told me to remain with my mother and my kids, that there was no need for me to come over to our house anymore, and that we were over. I suddenly felt dizzy hearing him utter those words that I passed out. When I woke up, Andrew wasn't there. I can't recall how many times I prayed everything should be a dream before asking my mom where my husband was. She couldn't say a word as tears just kept rolling down her cheeks. I laid on the bed wailing for hours as I knew my life was over. Andrew had sent most of my stuff and the kids' stuff too to my mother's home. I can't do anything for days now but cry. I love my husband so much I don't know what to do anymore. I'm so scared to go to him as each time I close my eyes, I see his cold-looking eyes shooting lasers at me. Most times I would dream of our time together and wake up to reality in the morning, broken. I don't know what to do anymore. I know most of you would blame me and call me names, but please remember, no one is flawless. We all make mistakes in life. Although mine is so great and I know I'm to be blamed for everything, but please, I definitely need help. I want my husband back. Please, what do? I can't lose him. Please help me. Update. I have been literally living on Reddit ever since I posted about my mistake and poured everything here asking for help to get back with my husband. But all I got in return were criticism and hate comments which hit me so hard like a punch that I felt worse each time I saw them. I know I made a grave mistake, and I have no excuse to justify what I did, but that doesn't mean you guys should shred me into more pieces that I'm already in. Most people said I don't deserve to be happy because I am a very selfish person. Some said I am an idiot, which I already know I am. You all don't need to say it anymore. A comment even mentioned that I should go back to the man I was so crazy about and continue having fun after all. All my kids are his, and I should let my husband be happy that I'd be nothing but a nightmare and darkness in his life. I cried so hard after reading that, as I lost every ounce of hope I held on to. Accepting reality with the things that most of the people on this platform were saying about me was nothing but a bitter truth I had to live with made it hurt even more. I'm already going through a lot, especially after what happened, and I'm back again with an update because things have become worse. Andrew had completely ghosted me, and I still find it hard to believe that he could actually stay for a whole month without hearing from me. Last week, I received divorce papers from our family lawyer. Holding the divorce papers in my hand made my chest ache as hot tears rolled down my cheeks. My whole body was filled with fear as I couldn't bring myself to picture a future without my husband by my side. Why only now? Why did it have to take me 7 years of my marriage for me to realize just how much Andrew meant to me? The pain I am feeling is something I cannot explain. Driven by fear, I ran over to Andrew's place to beg him for his forgiveness. Arriving there, I saw my mom on her knees begging Andrew to have mercy and consider leaving me. He held my mom to her feet and calmly asked her to leave. Seeing the fact that even my mom's plea wasn't getting to him got me wailing again. I immediately fell to my knees and started begging him again, crawling towards him. He immediately pulled away, and the calm look he had on his face when talking to my mom had dissolved and was replaced with one that clearly stated I was wasting my time. I even went on by telling him to forgive me for the sake of our kids, and they missed him and wouldn't stop asking about him. I was willing to say or use any means to get him back, but Andrew wasn't buying it. Instead, his face darkened. He corrected me by saying the kids were never his, and he was certain I would do a good job explaining to them what had happened between us since it was my expertise, and I was good at lying and deceiving people. He used the fact that I was able to fool him throughout our marriage to say that fooling the kids won't be so hard since I'm so good at it. He went on saying that he couldn't accept that he had wasted 7 good years of his life trying to build something that was never his from the beginning. He told me how much he had loved me and how happiness he felt the day I told him we should both get married. He confessed that day was one of the happiest days in his life as he felt his dream had come true. He added how much those memories meant to him as it was what kept him going during the times he was going through a rough patch. But in just a flash, I was able to turn those memories to nightmares. He would have never imagined that I had only asked him to marry me just so I could hide the fact that I was pregnant for another man, and how much of an idiot he was to think what we had was love, when I had just been playing him for a fool, while actually keeping the truth a secret from him even after all those years. He went on to say as if that wasn't enough, I still had the guts to cheat on him with the same man and got pregnant and still had the heart to lie about him being the father. He growled so much about how much of a fool he looked to me for me to be so confident and think I could play him for the second time. He said he couldn't believe that after seeing me cry while on call with me that morning, he had to suspend everything and hurried home just so he could be by my side and make me feel better, only for me to welcome him with such a news. He spoke so much about how much he detested me and how a mere sight of me disgusted him so much. His words sliced through my body like someone was using a knife to leave straight cuts all over my body. All I could do was cry and beg, but he didn't change his mind. Instead, he got more furious and he ferociously grabbed the divorce papers I had in hand and threw a fit that I should sign it. He looked like a beast, which had me shuddering from fear. My breathing was unsteady and I felt like I was going to die. Andrew coldly told me that even if I were to faint now, he would wait until I woke up and sign the divorce papers, as he doesn't want to have anything to do with me again, as I had never truly loved him. I told him I loved him so much, and I would die without him, and he said if I died, it would take nothing away from him but only save him the stress of processing our divorce. That's when I knew it was clearly over. The Andrew I married would never say such words to me. I just realized how the small wrong things we do in life which we try to justify can easily destroy us. I learned it the hard way while signing the divorce papers and getting kicked out of a place I once considered a home. With rage, I hurried over to Felix's place to pour out my anger and hatred towards him, and also to make him take responsibility for the kids and the baby that was growing inside me too. But getting there, I saw him get handcuffed by the Interpol. I learned he had laundered money illegally from his ex-wife's family and had fled back to the U.S. to hide, but he still got caught and was going to serve a jail sentence as his wife and her family had no intentions of showing him any mercy. That alone served like a last blow to me. It was then that I realized just how much of a fool I was. All the excitement I had when I saw Felix suddenly turned to anger and disgust. I couldn't accept the fact that he was the father of my kids. The shock and stress took a toll on me that I ended up having a miscarriage. My life since then has been filled with nothing but gnawing emptiness that has sworn to never leave my side. I struggle to make a living and be strong for my kids and my mom. Sometimes I'd find myself outside Andrew's home hoping to see him, only to learn he had transferred to his company's branch in Italy for a fresh start. It hurt me so much to see how easily he had moved on and forgotten about us, about me. I don't have any right to cry or get angry at anyone knowing I had brought all this all upon myself the moment I took my marriage and Andrew's love for granted. The way people around me look at me with so much irritation and the fact that Andrew will never be a part of my life again is more than enough punishment to me. Yes, I messed up and I still find it hard to believe I have lost everything. It felt like yesterday when I believed I had played my cards well only to get busted in such a humiliating and unpredictable manner. I will forever live my life atoning for what I did to Andrew. I hope he experiences happiness wherever he is, even if it hurts that I am not the reason behind it. I hope he can forget everything and be happy. In that way I could forgive myself too for hurting someone like him. This might be my last update. Thank you all for reading. I hope a time in my life will come when a little light will shine through the darkness I'm currently trapped in, and I will move on too. I wish everyone the best, including myself. Bye, Reddit.